Bom dia a todos. Welcome to our webinar on Chinese e-commerce. My name is Augusto Castro. I'm the head of the China unit of Apex Brazil, and we are here to have an overview on Chinese e-commerce. And to talk about numbers and trends in Chinese e-commerce, we have a very special guest with us, James Aaron. James is a partner at Kung Fu Data, which is an e-commerce operator and market entry advisory company in China, based in Shanghai. Welcome to Brazil, James.
Great, thank you for having me.
Chinese online sales are likely to reach $1 trillion in 2019. There are approximately 500 million Chinese online shoppers. China is also a very innovative and dynamic market. It has developed a very efficient logistics structures that allows very fast deliveries all over the country. It has its own payment systems such as Alipay and WeChat Pay. New trends arise very quickly, such as mass customizations, integration with social media, omni-channel retailing, and so on. And so, James, China is already the largest market in the world in terms of sales revenues. How bigger do you expect it to be within 5-10 years?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I'd like to say you really sound like a China expert to begin with. And the numbers and statistics are generally correct. We see the market in China continuing to grow. The growth rate year over year has slowed down, but as you mentioned, there's still a large population in the second and third, fourth tier cities that haven't come online yet or are not purchasing as much online on the e-commerce sites. And not only that, when we look at the mix of what people are buying online, it used to be just electronics or ready-made products, but now we're also seeing a shift into the grocery market, where on average upwards of 18 to 20% of all B2C commerce in China today is done online. Only about 5% or less of that is in the grocery category. So we see growth not only in terms of the overall numbers, but also in specific sectors, categories in the market.
Great. The Chinese market is dominated by giant companies such as Tmall, Alibaba Group, and JD, which are responsible for roughly 80% of the market share in China. Is there any way foreign brands can avoid these giants in China, or they have to deal with these big companies to get into the Chinese market?
Well, in one sense, we say if you can't beat them, join them. But really, when we look at those large players in the market, these represent marketplaces, right? So Tmall, the Alibaba group, including Tmall and Taobao, which is the B2C and the C2C markets, the market itself does not compete directly with the brand under that type of model. But it's really a facilitator of trade. And what those platforms facilitate is things like, first of all, collecting, optimizing, and driving traffic to your site, to your store on that site. They also handle logistics, payments, the creation of special events. So there's a lot of benefits to working on those sites, or with those sites. Some of the drawbacks include, well, if you work with one site, can you also work with additional sites, open up additional channels? And also, what are the transaction fees for that site? How much do you have to spend on marketing to drive the traffic? So depending on how interesting your brand is, the type of market potential, and the type of relationship you can have with the platform, for instance, may be able to, are interested and willing to invest and give you additional traffic, inclusion in certain sales, and other special discounts and promotions.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you believe companies, new entrants to the market, do they have to choose one of the companies, or they have to choose JD or Alibaba, or they can build a strategy for both marketplaces?
Mm-hmm. So that depends a lot on the particular brand. So what we say is, first of all, understand the market. Understand and have the market data, the research and analysis, which is one of the things we provide. And then take that. Once you have that information, go and talk with the brands, or go talk with those platforms. So you'll talk with JD, Tmall, you may be speaking with VIP Shop and others depending on your category. And what you're really trying to do is to shop your brand. to come back with the best deal that you can for phase one for your launch into the China market. And in some cases, Tmall may say, you have a great brand, it's very interesting, but geez, we just signed 5 brands just like yours last week, so we don't want to take your brand now. Where JD, for instance, may say, actually, we're just opening up a new category and we want to actually purchase, as a distributor, make a large purchase of your brand at a reasonable price. So we really understand the market, but when you go in, try to shop your deal, get the best deal you can, and then remember that this is your initial entry into the market. There'll be a phase 2, a phase 3. Once you get up and running and optimized, you'll be looking for additional channels to expand your brand.
Well, let's talk about some trends in the Chinese market. One of them is the growing integration between e-commerce and social media, such as WeChat and Weibo in China. Like one of the buzzwords in the Chinese e-commerce is the so-called customer experience management, like brands looking for ways to enrich the customer experience online. How do you see this trend, and what does it mean for companies, for new entrants to the market in terms of brand activation and brand building in China?
Mm-hmm. Well, first we say China is like no other e-commerce market in the world. It is right now China e-commerce represents half of the global e-commerce market. So when you're going to China, you have to be appealing to the Chinese consumers. Now, for instance, if I shop on Amazon in the US, I want to get in, find my product, and check out. Right? But in China, shopping online is it's a multimedia, it's an entertainment experience. So we want brands to shop on your page for a minute or 2 minutes. We have, example, one of our customers sells surgical gloves. And we have many customers that on average spend a half an hour just on that site, going through the reviews, the videos, learning about the products. You really want to create that multimedia environment. So if historically in your home country or in other markets that you work in, you simply hand it off to a distributor, or you have certain campaigns in the China market, just understand it's a very, very rich multimedia experience, and you want to capture and captivate and entertain your customers.
One of the trends is the so-called key opinion leaders, the KOLs. What can you say about the use of these internet celebrities? I think it's Wang Hong in China. These internet celebrities should promote your products in China.
This is one of the fascinating things about e-commerce. From my perspective, I look at e-commerce as the great equalizer, right? Because when you go to China, honestly, the Chinese consumer does not care how big or small your company or your brand is. What they care about is, do you have a quality product that meets their needs? And if you can do it in a way that tells the story of your brand, that's very, very powerful. So one of my favorite internet celebrities, the KOLs, is a guy who actually evaluates suitcases, right? And he's most Chinese are not that big, but this is a big Chinese guy. And he'll take the suitcase and roll it out, and he'll sit on it, and he'll explain it, open it up, and the crowds go wild. The amount of activation that he gets through that channel is amazing. So you want to find people like that in the marketplace, and there are actually firms now that specialize in finding the right KOL for you.
And how expensive is to market your product in China, like using these KOLs and other marketing tools in China? How expensive is for like a medium-sized company that doesn't have like a very big budget? Mm-hmm. How expensive you think it will get?
Sure. So the other interesting thing is, if you were to build a company today, in general, it's a lot less expensive than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago, because you don't have to create all the parts, all the infrastructure. And it's very similar to that in China today, where you can hire key opinion leaders for a few $100, a few $1,000, depending on the type of work that they do. And you can generate a lot of buzz, a lot of demand through these KOL and special events like that.
James, can you give us some examples of like some successful cases of foreign brands in China and not so successful cases? What do you think are the most common mistakes like foreign brands that come to China make?
So it's always easy and the most interesting to talk about the mistakes. We look at it from a very practical level. Because when we were talking with brands about entering the foreign market, we started with very simple things. Do you have your trademark registered in China? Do you have a Chinese name? Is that registered? What type of product is it? Because when you import it, does it fall under any of the regulated categories? Do you have a distributor, or have you given legal or exclusive or semi-exclusive rights to offline and online channels? These are all fundamental things that very much affect how you go to the China market.
And what would be the first steps, like for a foreign company, a Brazilian company that wants to get into the China market? What would be the first steps, do you think?
Sure.
In terms of.
So the first thing we do is, we say, let's do some upfront analysis to figure out, does the market exist for your product? So for instance, we'll go in and analyze how big is the market, and specifically how big is the market in your category, in your price point. Because frankly, you don't really care about anything else in the China market. It doesn't matter that it's growing 50 or 100% in your category. What you care about is what's happening in your category at your price point. Right? So we look at that. We look at, is your brand activated? Do people know about it? Are there people selling your product in the market today? What are the competition? What are they doing? So we take a look at all those factors, and then also, as we mentioned, look at trademarks, regulatory, your contracts, existing contracts in the market. Once we have a good feel on that, typically we'll say, let's go to China. So we actually take a trip and introduce you to the key people at the major platforms, or also some of the smaller platforms that work directly with your vertical, to see what kind of deal, what kind of opportunity you can have, and also introduce you to other partners, for instance, the KOL companies and the other social media companies.
What do you think, James, would be the right balance between outsourcing to your trade partner in China and keeping in-house skills, in terms of the brand strategy? One of the most common mistakes that some foreign brands do in China, that they outsource everything to the partner in China, and sometimes they lose control of how the brand is managed in China. What do you think would be the right balance between outsourcing to the partner and keeping in-house?
Well, I compare it to flying a plane, right? You realize that you're not qualified to fly the plane in China, right? So you're going to have to get a pilot. You want to find a competent, somebody to run your store, somebody to execute for your brand. Having said that, you need to give them direction. Right? So you have to be educated enough, understand the market, and get their feedback to know which way you're going to fly. So I think it's the combination of that, having enough internal competence to know what you should and should not do based on input from your partner, input from the industry, and then also to be able to follow up on a transparent way on a day-to-day basis.
So, do you think companies they must have people dedicated full time to manage the Chinese e-commerce if they want to go to China, or do you think this is a big issue for companies that want to sell online in China?
So I think you should have staff. They may not be full time on China, but they have to have some part of their daily work or monthly activities dedicated to understanding, following the market, working with the partner. And that happens on a couple different levels, mainly strategy, also marketing, and logistics or fulfillment. So those are the key areas that you need. You need executive sponsorship, and you need somebody that is dedicated at least part of their time to look at that market, because the market evolves so quickly, and you'll be out of stock and out of SKUs. There's an event coming up, and they'll say, hey, can we use this new creative? That information needs to be turned very quickly, because in China, time to market, time for delivery is very, very key.
Well, China is a very crowded and competitive market. How can companies protect themselves from predatory competition, from counterfeit products and aggressive undercutting in the online platforms? How do you see this?
Well, what we say is that China is a competitive market. If you have a good product, it doesn't matter if you are in China or not, your products will be being sold in China. So really the strategy is to think how important is the China market to me? How important is it to our company's history, or going forward strategy in growth? And how can we control that? So generally we say if you have a viable product in the market, again it will be sold there, but let's try to control that market. If we're in the right position, let's set up that flagship site and let's capture a lot of that traffic, but also let's partner with our sellers that are in the market, either officially or unofficially. Let's bring them into our fold. Let's make them our friends and fill up those top search spots with either our own store or stores that we've officially set up as distributors.
When companies should consider opening a flagship store in like Tmall, for example, when is the right time to have a flagship store?
Mm-hmm. So that depends on a couple factors. So for instance, as e-commerce advisors for China, the key things that we look at are things like brand awareness, your search engine index. We look at are your products already being sold by the gray trade, the Daigou market in China already? What are your competitors doing? What's happening with the marketplace? And also, importantly, we phone ahead. We call up the major platforms and say, hey, I have this great Brazilian company. Here's the type of merchandise they have. Here's the sales that they're doing. They're already in the market. Here's their level of awareness. What do you think? Do you think if we officially submitted an application to join your platform, whether that's Tmall or JD or these others, what do you think? And then we sort of craft that package to help sell and motivate platforms to take the brand on. And the best scenario is where Tmall or another of the platforms will officially accept the brand to launch a flagship store and also give them what we call KA or key account status, which means that the brand manager at the platform actually has in their personal metrics to help that store succeed, which means they're going to drive additional traffic. So how would you like another 500,000 visits or another 1 million hits to your links or to your site? Those are the types of deals that we try to craft.
Well, the Chinese consumer is known for being very active, like in writing reviews and pay a lot of attention to reviews by previous buyers. How important is customer service management in China?
It's kind of like asking the question, do you want to live to see another day? So we, as an example, we had a medical company that was, because of regulations, the distributor that they had to use was a traditional distributor. And the customer support staff was not used to dealing with people from the internet, right? So a customer would send in a note, say they have an issue with the product, and the customer support was actually very rude, right? Again, they weren't trained, they weren't used to the pace of the Chinese internet users or e-commerce economy. And you could see it in the customer service scores were very low. Because those scores, the customer service scores, were rated low by the consumers, this store was not able to get into a number of the promotional events. And we know from experience that about half of the annual sales for a given store comes from these promotional events. So obviously there was a lot of work to do. We were able to go in and sort of retrain the customer service staff, take those wait times from 1 minute or 2 minutes to reply via chat down to 30 seconds or less. And the customer service scores went up, they got into the events, and it completely increased the sales of the brand. So to answer your question, it's critical.
Great. Well, one last question, James. Like Brazil, China is our main trade partner, but 80% that we sell to China is basically commodities. So Brazilian products and brands, they're not like very known in China. We don't have many Brazilian brands in China. So we are kind of latecomers to the Chinese market. What piece of advice would you give to Brazilian companies that want to sell to China, but they are like kind of scary of like a big and competitive and crowded Chinese market? What kind of advice would you give them?
I would say that it may be big and scary, but it's the biggest e-commerce party on the block. And you do want to at least take a look to see is it the right time for you to be there, and understand that once you understand the principles of the market, the market itself can be very fair. And I call e-commerce, I think of it as the great equalizer. It doesn't matter if you're a big company or a small company. If you have a good product, a quality product at a fair price that fits in with what the Chinese demographic is looking for, you can have a successful business in China.
That's great. James, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.